Blizzard has just dropped some plans for class tuning on the next reset, and they are baffling. Hi, it's Llarold, and I'm going to talk about some of these nerfs and buffs to tanks, and what they mean for the rest of Season 4, and more importantly, what they mean for the future of WoW. But first, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, let's just sort of preface here by saying these are some very weird changes. Why didn't they come in 3 weeks ago at the start of Season 4? Who knows? The important thing to remember while looking at all of this is that there is one thing Blizzard never ever does, and that is they never ever make nerfs to an overperforming spec late in an expansion and then make notes about those nerfs that they've made and revert them as the new expansion comes. So these are permanent changes, and that's the important thing to bear in mind here as we look at all of this. The nerfs and buffs, they're not temporary, they don't have an expiration date. Now Blizzard probably will find justification and nerf, I don't know, Warrior and Bear Druid again in the future. They always do, but for now, this is it for changes, and these changes are permanent in so much as anything in WoW is permanent. All right, let's start with the class changes, and let's actually start with DK, because I think that's really important here. There are no changes to Blood DK. Now you might say, is that a problem? Well, I think it might be. Blood DK is overwhelmingly the most popular tank in Raid. It is the tankiest tank in Raid. Survivability can be a bit of a misleading metric, but in terms of damage, it is one of the top 2 damage output specs in Raid. It is a bit funky right now. They are currently in Raid, supposed to wear their old 2-piece and their new 2-piece, and that's really annoying. That's really annoying. That is a thing that sucks. Everybody hates having to wear 2-piece, and as we'll kind of see in a bit here, that is something they fixed for balanced druids, but something they completely ignored for Blood DKs. Very, 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 very annoying. But with that being said, Blood DK is easily the best tank in the game in Raid, and one of the better, sort of, I guess, above average tanks, maybe middle of the road tanks in Mythic Plus. So maybe they didn't need any nerfs, maybe they did. Either way, they didn't get any changes at all. Who did get changes is Demon Hunter, and Vengeance Demon Hunter has gotten some pretty significant nerfs. They have had the duration of Sigil of Silence reduced now down to only 4 seconds. The cooldown has been increased by 50% up to 90 seconds. The cooldown reduction that they get from Cycle of Binding on all of their sigils, and just to show that off, wrong talent tree here. That is this talent over on the right hand side right here. Nope. This one right here, Cycle of Binding. So anytime you hit an enemy with a sigil, you get 3 seconds of cooldown reduction on all of your sigils. That is now 2. This has pretty significant impact on their ability to reset the cooldown of Sigil of Silence, and with the base cooldown of Sigil of Silence going up to 90 seconds instead of just the base of 1 minute, that's going to be really, really big. Now, what's surprising here is, and I think, kind of disappointing, is people have really been asking for illuminated sigils to just only give 2 sigil charges for your damaging sigils, Sigil of Flame and Elysian Decree, and Blizzard has chosen not to go that direction. They're going to keep 2 silent sigils in, they're going to keep 2 sigils of Misery in, they're going to keep 2 sigils of Chains in. So Vengeance Demon Hunter isn't losing the incredible amount of crowd control that they get out of Sigil of Misery and the ability to Sigil of Chains twice in less than a minute. I mean, it is significantly less than a 1 minute recharge. It's still a base 1 minute recharge, and then you are getting that cooldown reduction from Cycle of Binding. But with this nerf, with this significant nerf to Cycle of Binding, and then also losing the current tier set bonus in the future, the cooldown reduction that you get on Sigil of Flame by spending Fury, this actually will mean they probably won't be able to maintain 100% uptime on Sigil of Flame. I mean, they certainly won't be able to maintain 100% uptime on Sigil of Flame in the future when you don't have the tier set. Even just right now, if you're playing a new character and you don't have the tier set, you won't be able to maintain 100% uptime. But then, you look at Time Running Pandaria and the War Within, and I actually think this represents a very significant nerf to Vengeance Demon Hunter's survivability, because so much of that is tied up in illuminated sigils, giving you that 15% parry chance on targets that you have Sigil of Flame on, and then you have 100% uptime on that. With both of those things, or I guess the uptime going down, you then lose that parry chance, that consistency of defense, and that really has cascading effects on all of Vengeance Demon Hunter's ability to be a really, really strong tank in Mythic Plus. This is more of a raid damage change, but it still has some impact in Mythic Plus, but Soul Cleave damage was also reduced by 8% in pure single target raid situations where Vengeance Demon Hunter, as we look here and see DPS, this is Mythic Plus. here we go. This is raid damage numbers. As we can see, Vengeance Demon Hunter is the best damaging tank in raid right now, and because it is so popular in Mythic Plus, it's also been very popular in this sort of abbreviated, you know, whatever, reheated, remicrowaved season of raiding. Yeah, I think this will represent a pretty decent drop in damage. Basically, what this is going to do is this is going to drop them down below Blood DK slightly. So Blood DK will be both the tankiest tank in raid and the highest damage tank in raid, and then also have the best group utility in raid in the form of mass grip, regular grips, you know, just a lot of value in raid. So Blood DK really is getting, like, kind of getting it positively, getting it from both ends here. That they're closest competition is getting nerfed. They are not getting any changes at all, and so they're allowed to just sort of passively be buffed by osmosis. They're just rising up, you know, purely through the impact of Vengeance getting a nice big nerf. Now, as I mentioned, Balanced Druid had been wearing two-piece old tier two-piece tier set and current two-piece tier set, and now they are having that buffed. The current two-piece tier set is being buffed, so that's good, you know. As is always the case, anytime that Balanced Druid isn't very good, they get on Twitter and they cry and cry and cry and cry and cry and cry and cry until they get buffed. And as always, it works. And honestly, I wish I had that kind of power. I don't really begrudge them at all. You know, you play a class that only has one interesting damage spec, and then you choose to play the one that isn't that one. You know, you want to at least be strong if you're going to play a boring Balanced Druid. And so, you know, I get why they cry so much. I also would cry if I were forcing myself to play Balanced Druid. And now here we have, I think, maybe the most jaw-dropping set of changes in today's list of changes. Really the one that was just so baffling. I saw this and I was furious. This, like, is such a confusing set of changes. It is these nerfs to Brewmaster Monk. Keg Smash damage, minus 10%. Spinning Crane Kick damage, minus 10%. Summon White Tiger Statue damage, minus 30%. I hate White Tiger Statue. I would rather it just be killed. And in the War Within, it is. So that's great. I wouldn't mind if they just moved that already to now. I really hate White Tiger Statue. But nonetheless, this is a substantial set of nerfs to Brewmaster Monk's ability to deal damage right now. And that's very frustrating because, as we can see from the damage numbers in Raid, they're subpar. They are below average in Raid. In terms of damage output, this is a significant reduction in their damage output in AoE and in Mythic Plus. Make no mistake, let's take a look at their damage in Mythic Plus. Oh my god, it's crazy. But then we actually look at the popularity in Mythic Plus, we look at the max key rating. They're the weakest tank in Mythic Plus. Yes, they have a massive amount of damage, and I think, you know, you and I, we don't work for Blizzard. We would look at this and we'd go, hey, you know, they're having fun down there, let them have their fun. I think that is the difference here is, you know, video game design, it is hard. Boy, it sure would be crazy to have everybody question everything I ever do, right? Ultimately, yes, this is a pretty substantial difference between Monk and everybody else in terms of damage output, but as we can see from their, like, lackluster raid damage, it very clearly was AoE pad in Mythic Plus situations. And unfortunately, these two nerfs, the Keg Smash damage more importantly, but also the White Tiger Statue damage, these have ripple effects in single target. So I think the Brewmaster Monk single target damage is probably going to fall below Prot Warriors, since there are also some Prot Warrior buffs, and that's going to leave Prot Paladin as sort of a outstandingly bad damage option. I mean, their damage is comically bad in Mythic Plus, and it's also pretty bad in Raid too. I say this as somebody who is unfortunately playing Prot Pally so that I can spell word lazy healers in the current Raid tier, and it's been pretty annoying on some of the fights in the Raid. Broodkeeper in particular trying to pick up trash with, you know, I'm throwing everything I have at them and it just isn't enough to keep the mobs off of people. It's very frustrating that the damage is so poor. And now Brewmaster Monk is going to get to know how that feels because they were doing such a good job of padding in Mythic Plus AoE and frankly not being very tanky in Mythic Plus. And that is, you know, that is sort of the one positive here is Healing Sphere healing has gone up by 10%. That's one of your more significant healing sources, especially in Mythic Plus. So that's actually good defensively going forward. And then maybe a bigger change is that Brewmaster is getting the ability to stagger a larger percentage of magical damage. And this is actually a pretty substantial bump, 45% up to 55%. That is actually a pretty significant increase in terms of magic defense. So that's good for Monk. I think that Monk will probably be more well-rounded, but frankly, it only has one area where it really succeeds, excels right now, and that would be dealing damage in AoE, and they have lost that. So that sucks, and it really pre-nerfs Monk for the next expansion, which is a bummer. I think rotationally, the biggest thing I've really had a problem with Monk in Dragonflight is that Keg Smash is just very weak in raid. The whole spec is really built around Blackout, Kick, and Tiger Palm. And this is something that hero specs in the coming expansion had kind of buffed. They really buffed the damage of Keg Smash and basically fixed this issue. And then this nerf right here completely cancels that out. It just re-nerfs Monk right back to how it is now. And that sucks. I am mad. You know, why did these changes happen in the first place? Monk deals a lot of AoE pad damage in Mythic Plus. That's pretty much it. It is the least popular tank in the game in Mythic Plus, as we can see. Popularity, all-time low. It's in the bottom half in raids in terms of popularity. It's not looking great. And, you know, it's definitely not going to get better off of the back of these changes. A 10% increase to Healing Sphere healing isn't going to make anybody want to roll Monk. I think the reason that it is so unpopular in Mythic Plus is its Mythic Plus utility is fairly weak. I like being able to dispel and paralyze. I do think that they do a pretty good job of dealing with affixes. I like Ring of Peace, but it brings the wrong debuff, basically. The Demon Hunter debuff adds hundreds of thousands of damage per second in raids. A competitive raid needs that magic damage debuff. The Monk debuff adds about 30,000 DPS in a standard Mythic raid, and significantly less in a standard Mythic Plus setup. I mean, potentially the only damage for the Monk themselves in a normal Mythic Plus setup with running triple caster DPS. The overwhelming majority of the damage that players deal in WoW is magic damage, and Blizzard designed this debuff system so that Monks and Demon Hunters provide an allegedly equal debuff, but it's not even remotely close. And Monk doesn't make up for this by dealing an equivalently large amount of damage in raids either. I mean, we can see their damage in Mythic Plus. It's very high, but it's also very paddy. If we look at their damage in raid, you can see Monk is significantly behind Vengeance Demon Hunter in terms of single target damage, while also providing a debuff that is significantly worse than the Vengeance Demon Hunter debuff, and not even being meaningfully tankier than Demon Hunters in raids, and significantly less tanky than Demon Hunters in Mythic Plus. It's just, there's just a math here that does not add up at all. And, you know, that's really unfortunate. There's really no way around it. Dragonflight has been the weakest expansion for Brewmaster Monks since they were introduced. The class is more complicated now than it has ever been. It is harder to play, and proportional to other tanks, it is weaker than they are. Monks have been a bottom 2 tank in both raids and Mythic Plus for most of Dragonflight, and if you look at the history of WoW, Monks being kind of bad in Mythic Plus is normal. Usually they're bad unless they have some sort of tier set bonus that they're able to exploit to make them really strong. But Monks being below average in raids since Mists of Pandaria is not normal at all, and they have been really bad for 2 of the 3 raids of this expansion. Really just kind of tough to deal with. And through all of that, Blizzard saw Monks down at the bottom of the barrel and said, not low enough, and started punching down as hard as they possibly could. All right, now let's move on to Paladin, which has gotten no changes. And I don't really think design-wise Paladins need any changes. They certainly don't need any buffs to their utility. They probably could use some nerfs to their group utility. I would really like to see spell warding expanded out to other specs or removed from the game, and then not have raid fights tuned around having that present and sort of forcing someone into the Paladin prison. And I do use the word prison, you know, very literally, because that is what I'm in right now. I do feel like I'm in jail. I'm in a no damage output jail where I can't do any damage. The rotation is pretty simple and boring, and I'm really only there because I have to spell ward people to cancel out some of the raid mechanics, and that really stinks. It's annoying to play. It's annoying to not be able to hold threat on a paladin in a lot of the fights. In single target against the Blood DK, in AoE against any damage dealers. You know, I have all my cooldowns rolling. I'm doing the best I can. This is the most damage a paladin can do. It just isn't very good. Doesn't feel great. With that being said, if they were buffed to deal a massive amount of damage, then, you know, then they would just be completely overpowered because their group utility is so gargantuan. So I don't really know what you can do. Paladin's kind of in a bad design state right now. I definitely don't envy anybody whose job it is to balance the current state of Prot Pally. And then we could finish up with Warrior, which I think is really the most interesting thing here. I'll start by saying that Fury Warriors complaining on social media and in the forums has been met with the absolute tiniest possible buff imaginable. 3% increased damage and then just tiny bonuses to their tier set. I don't think this is going to be enough to make Fury competitive, and that's a bummer because I like Fury. I've always thought Fury was the more fun spec, and I really would just like to see them get a little bit more than 3% damage, but you know, here we are. And now let's really talk about the big one, just all positives here, Protection Warrior. And they actually even wrote in some Protection Warrior developers' notes, and we'll just read through that here. Our goal for these changes is to reduce Protection Warrior's deaths due to the dangers that are most likely to kill them, like burst or magic damage. There are some talents that warriors have for protection against these threats, like Disrupting Shout, Bolster, or Battle Scarred Veteran, but it can be difficult to find the talent points for them. Let's just look at Battle Scarred Veteran, by the way. Okay, this talent right here, Battle Scarred Veteran, bugged, has been the entire expansion and beta. It will trigger on hits that pre-mitigation would bring you below 30%, which means that you can be at 70% health, take a hit, be at 50% health, and Battle Scarred Veteran will trigger and go on cooldown for 3 minutes. So I would not ever reference this talent at any point as anything that people want, because they shouldn't want it. This is one of the worst talents I've ever seen in my life. Good idea. I think if it just were able to trigger when you would die or when you would fall below 10% and then it actually worked correctly, I think that would be okay. But as it currently exists, it is a completely unusable talent, and so I wouldn't reference that at all. Sorry, had to stop and reference to talk about how bad it is. To provide more build flexibility, we are reducing the power of the Battering Ram talent and moving its damage and defensive benefits into core abilities. We're also increasing damage across the board and buffing some defensive talent options. These are good ideas. So this talent right here, Battering Ram, previously was bugged, and it was bugged for a while in this expansion. Shield Charge crits. It gives you 20% increased crit chance and crit damage with Shield Charge, and makes casting Shield Charge give you 20% auto attack damage and auto attack speed for 20 seconds. So previously it was increasing all crit damage, like all crit damage for Warrior, all of it. And so obviously that's a pretty 20% increased crit damage for everything is a pretty substantial buff. And so it was actually pretty good for a while. I still like the feel of it. I like the feel of getting a massive attack speed increase for a while after the fact on using like a major cooldown, but it has become a pretty optional talent. And as we can see in the right hand talent tree here, this is the standard Mythic Plus setup. You are taking Disrupting Shout. You are taking Thunderlord. You're not taking Battering Ram. This is normal. You're taking Spell Block. Like, this is all normal stuff. I didn't really understand the message here, because this is a message that feels like it could have been written 11 months ago, and I think it would have made sense at that point. But as things currently stand, and have stood for Prot Warrior for about 6 months now, the standard Mythic Plus setup doesn't use Battering Ram. It does take Disrupting Shout and Thunderlord. So, bit weird. But with that being said, still nice to see some buffs, and there are buffs to 5% increased ability damage across the board, 30% increased Devastator damage. So that's a pretty significant single target damage increase that will definitely add up in Raid, but also add up in Mythic Plus. You know, you do still need to do some single target damage in Mythic Plus as well, so that's good. 6% more Ignore Pain. Not a bad thing. Disrupting Shout's cooldown reduced from 90 seconds to 75, so Prot Warriors aren't exactly going to be Vengeance Demon Hunters when it comes to like spamming Sigil of Silence on packs of mobs, but you know, even Vengeance Demon Hunters aren't Vengeance Demon Hunters anymore, so yeah, 75-second cooldown on an AoE interrupt is not too bad. Enduring Alacrity getting its effects basically just doubled is pretty interesting, because Enduring Alacrity is this talent over here, 5% increased stamina, armor, and 1% haste. Now doubling all of that, 10% stamina, 10% armor, 10% or 2% haste, I think that's pretty good. The problem is, what do you drop to take it? Do you drop Disrupting Shout, the talent that they just name-checked as being something they want you to be able to afford to take? Is that what you drop? Do you drop Thunderlord, the talent that gives you massive cooldown reduction on Demoralizing Shout, basically cuts the cooldown from 45 seconds to about 22? I don't think so. Do you drop Booming Voice? I'd rather not. Indomitable? Obviously not. Violent Outburst? No. It's a conundrum here. There are so many good talents along the way to it. If I were to drop anything, it would probably be in Mythic Plus. It would probably be Punish, but then how do you take it? You can't afford it if you drop Punish. So it's a bit of a weird situation here where they've seen that there is this issue of Prot Warrior not having a lot of flexibility in talents. They've nerfed a talent that you already don't take and buffed some talents that you can't afford. So yeah, bit tough here. I think justifiably you could say maybe I'll drop Thunderlord in order to pick up Enduring Alacrity. You lose about 50% uptime. Well, you go from Demoralizing Shout being on a 45-second cooldown by default to about a 22-second cooldown on average. And you switch over to having 10% more stamina, armor, and haste. And then because of, where is it over here, Armor to the Teeth, you do actually get a little bit more strength, a little bit more damage out of getting that armor bonus. Very small, right? I don't necessarily think this is actually going to be good. I'm just hypothesizing about the possibility of taking Enduring Alacrity. It would be nice to be able to afford this talent easily without having to give up some sort of significant utility. But I just don't really see it in the current state of the class. Could be wrong. And then finally, Battering Ram has been nerfed to only give you 10% attack damage and attack speed for 20 seconds. Now, you know, basically the idea here is that you just wouldn't take Battering Ram anymore. So sure, but you know, again, that's already how Prot Warriors have been playing in Mythic Plus for a while. So not really a significant change in the end. Ultimately, I think this is a pretty big set of buffs for Prot Warriors. I think it's great news for Warrior enjoyers, especially with the teeny tiny little Fury buffs also happening. I feel pretty good about that. Now, do I think this means that Warriors are going to like rocket up in the meta? No, absolutely not. It does not shift the meta for Warriors, but I do think it's big for Time Running Pandaria and the War Within. All right, so those are the changes, and now I want to talk about how they'll actually impact the future of WoW. First off, Mop Remix, aka Time Running Pandaria, aka WoW Remix Pandaria, aka Not Mop Classic. Because that game mode is based on current class design and tuning, and basically just removes tier sets from the equation, my expectation was that Vengeance Demon Hunter would completely dominate the state of the game, and Blood DK would also be really great. I did think Monk would be pretty good in raids, and then Pally, Druid, and Warrior would all be kind of lackluster. The important thing about Time Running Pandaria, Remix, etc. is that it has raids, but it doesn't have Mythic Plus, so that really impacts the relative value of tanks in kind of a big way. Honestly, thinking about it now, maybe I had been overestimating Vengeance Demon Hunter's impact in that game mode because of that. But in any case, because of these changes, the big shifts here are that Vengeance Demon Hunter is definitely going to fall off. I think Monk will drop even further, and Warrior is probably going to rise up. But make no mistake, Blood DK is going to stand alone at the top of the mountain here. I think I will probably play a Warrior in Time Running, given that Monk is taking such a beating here in these changes. Realistically, I'll probably play a few classes. I probably will play Warrior and also Blood DK. And I mean, it's Pandaria. I gotta play a Monk at some point. I really do want all the transmogs and achievements, and it does seem like a lot of fun. So I'm still positive on playing a bunch of classes in that game mode, even if I am kind of disappointed that they've nerfed Brewmaster. Windwalker is still available and fun, so, you know, not the end of the world. All right, now for the real important part, the War Within. I do think this is going to significantly reduce Demon Hunter's Stranglehold on Mythic Plus in the coming expansion. I don't think it's going to make a huge difference right now because the damage is already done. In Dragonflight, people have their Demon Hunters geared up, and both Druid and Paladin didn't get any changes, so it's not looking great for them. Right now in the War Within Alpha, neither of the Vengeance Demon Hunter hero specs really have done all that much to impress me. There is an absolutely amazing bug in the Fellscarred tree, I'll throw that on the screen now, where you reset the cooldown of Fell Devastation anytime you cast Metamorphosis, but it counts the free meta proc that you get from speccing into Demonic and then using Fell Dev. So every time you cast Fell Dev while you're not in meta, it resets its own cooldown. So your rotation can include just casting Fell Dev every 7 seconds. It's completely broken. I am pretty confident that it's not intended, and once that is nerfed, I don't actually think Vengeance Demon Hunter is really going to be that dominant in the coming expansion in Mythic Plus, or in Raid for that matter. Now, as for Monks in the War Within, this sucks. I feel like the changes to the class so far in the War Within have been pretty good, and the Windwalker changes are absolutely amazing. It is a pleasure to play. But Brewmaster has gotten 0 spec changes so far, just some moderate buffs through like base class changes and then hero spec changes that are now all kind of being canceled out by these nerfs in this patch here, or in this hotfix here. It's honestly a little depressing, or at least it would be if I were just a monk one trick, but I'm not, so it's fine. I'll just play something else. I have literally said out loud in testing that I should quit playing Brewmaster and switch to Windwalker because it has been so much fun, but that's a stupid idea. I won't be doing that. Instead, I think Warrior is the tank on the rise. Now, let me just add that currently, before I talk about Warrior, Sand Lane Blood DK is the strongest tank I've ever seen in an alpha or beta at any point in nearly 15 years of playing and testing WoW, not including like late Siege of Orgrimmar, Brewmaster Monk. That was the all-time peak, but Sand Lane Blood DK of non-latent Pandaria tanks is the pinnacle. I actually think it could go through similar to how it is now, and if it does, Blood DK will completely dominate the landscape of early The War Within tanking in exactly the same way that Vengeance has been doing throughout Season 3 and Season 4 of Dragonflight, but there haven't been any changes to Blood DK, so that's kind of enough about them. Instead, let's talk about Warriors. The Colossus tree is way better than I had anticipated, and I think that with this week's changes, some of the class changes and spec buffs to Protection Warrior that are already implemented in the War Within, along with the state of the class tree, I think that Warriors could be poised to play a huge role in the coming expansion's first raid tier, very similar to how they did in Vault of the Incarnates in Dragonflight. Of course, things can and hopefully will be changed in huge ways between now and the expansion release, but as it is currently balanced, Blood DK is a huge winner from today's class tuning massacre. Vengeance Demon Hunter is the biggest loser here, I want to be clear about that, but Monk is some very significant collateral damage as well, and Warrior's actually looking really nice, really positive for the first time since the start of Dragonflight. Alright, I know that's a lot about random Tuesday hotfix class tuning, but I think it actually has some pretty significant impact on the long-term state of the game, so kind of wanted to give a thorough breakdown on that, and hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, and thanks for watching. Bye.